Hey there, it's Margaret from Let's Learn to Sew, and in today's video, we're going to talk about seam allowances. So first, let's go ahead and cover exactly what a seam allowance is. So a seam allowance is this area right here. It's from where your stitch line is to the outer edge of the fabric. So here, on this set of pattern instructions, you can see that the seam allowance is 5/8. It lets you know that if it's going to be anything different, then it's going to be included on the actual pattern pieces. Now 5/8 is the standard seam allowance for most garments. You always want to go ahead and refer to your instructions though to make sure that there's not something different on the pattern you're using. Now you can see here, these seam allowances are pretty close. One is 3/8 and the other is 5/8. Now it's tempting to think that that small amount isn't going to make a difference, but it really is, when you consider that it's that difference in each seam of the project. So if you're talking about a dress and you have that much of a difference multiplied through all of the seams, it can really change the fit of the garment. Now let's go ahead and take a look at how we measure the seam allowance when we're sewing. Now the way you measure your seam allowance is you're going to line up the edge of the fabric with one of these markings. Now, it's important to know where the beginning marking is for this measurement. So on this machine, when it's set at the 0, stitch, the 5/8 is from the point where the needle comes down on that stitch out to this marking here. It depends on your machine. My Husqvarna Viking machine, it's measured from when the needle is in the middle position on the presser foot out to the 5/8 marking. So you want to make sure that you know where the beginning measurement is on your machine. And it should tell you in the owner's manual. But let's say the owner's manual doesn't tell you, or you happen to have a plain needle plate here, so there's no markings on it. What are you going to do? Well, that's easy. What you're going to do is you're going to take your seam gauge. You're going to mark the 5/8 mark. Here's that. So you're going to see where 5/8 lines up and where the needle should be. So you can see it's right here. And then you can take a piece of tape and mark it on your 5/8 marking. You want to make sure that whenever you're marking with tape that you do keep it straight. The other thing that you can use is a magnetic seam guide, and I do have a separate video on how to use the magnetic seam guide. I love it when I'm teaching people how to sew, or when you're doing a really intricate project. It helps just to make sure you stay straight. So what I'm going to do, I've got my needle on stitch 0, my needle's in the position that it's supposed to be in for the beginning marking. I'm going to line up the edge of the fabric at that 5/8 mark. I'm going to lower my presser foot, and then I'm going to begin stitching, and I'm going to make sure that I keep the edge of the fabric lined up right on that line. And lift the presser foot, we're going to take the fabric out. Now obviously if you were stitching something you would back stitch, but just for this demonstration I didn't. So I've got my beginning mark, my 5/8 mark, and it is dead on. So I hope that helps you understand seam allowances and the importance of them, and how to make sure that you've got a correct seam allowance. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know and I'll be happy to answer them.